Hi, I'm Emmy OK. Today on the stream, the story of a summer getaway for kids with disabilities and how it produced some of America's most determined disability rights activists. This is Crip Camp.
What, you want me to tell them what happened? Well, two people got cramps and they're spreading. We were all very hyper about it. And I have to go shower some people. I'll see you later.
I wanted to be part of the world, but I didn't see anyone like me in it. I hear about a summer camp for the handicapped run by hippies. Somebody said you probably will smoke dope with the counselors, and I'm like, sign me up.
Come to Camp Jeanette and find yourself.
There I was in Woodstock.
You wouldn't be picked to be on the team back home, but at Jeanette, you had to go up to bat.
Even when we were that young, we helped empower each other. It was allowing us to recognize that the status quo is not what it needed to be.
That was a clip from the trailer for the Oscar-nominated documentary, Crip Camp. 3 of the people involved in that documentary are with us right now. Hello, Judy. Hello, Jim. Hello, Nicole. Judy, introduce yourself. Tell everybody your involvement in the documentary, just briefly, and who you are if you need an introduction. Go ahead, Judy.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to be on the program. My name is Judy Heumann. I'm a disability rights activist, and I'm involved with the program because I was on the staff at Camp Jeanette at that point, and one of the people who was involved in the development of the movement prior to the camp and after camp.
Hello, Jim. Sign me up. Jim, nice to see you. Your connection with the film and who you are. Introduce yourself to our global audience.
Hi, everybody. Jim LeBrecht. I went to Camp Jeanette, and it was an incredible experience in my life. I've been working in the documentary world as a sound mixer and designer for a long time, and brought this story of Camp Jeanette to Nicole NewnHam in the hopes that she would make a documentary about Camp Jeanette and its connection to the disability rights movement.
So good to have you. Nicole, welcome to the stream. Tell everybody who you are, what you do, your connection to Camp Crip.
Hi, I'm Nicole NewnHam. I'm really happy to be here with everybody. I'm a documentary filmmaker. I have been for 25 years, and Jim has been the brilliant sound mixer and sound designer that I've worked with. And when he brought me this story and started telling me about this, hippie utopia that existed, in which people were really treated equitably, and there was like sex and drugs and rock and roll at a great time, and that was connected somehow. That kind of experience of liberation was really connected to the spark or the seeds of the disability rights movement. I was so moved by the story, and what I thought was really special about it was that it was Jim's story, and I asked Jim if he would co-direct the film with me, and that's how I got involved.
Ah, good move, Jim. If you could describe Camp Jeanette in a sentence, what would you say, Jim?
Freedom. I think it's a place that I found freedom and an ability to be unabashed and myself.
Judy, what would your sentence be about Camp Jeanette?
Liberation, a fight for equality, and a recognition that we all had the ability and right to contribute.
Something was very special was happening there in the 1970s, Jim. Can you explain to us what was exceptional about this camp for kids with disabilities?
Well, I think Camp Jeanette was really kind of a product of the times. There was so many different liberation movements going on, the anti-war protests, and we were all really kind of questioning authority and the status quo. And being somebody with a disability at that time, this was a place that was just so much different. I felt like I wasn't really treated as just a normal kid outside of, rarely was I feeling that way. But at Camp Jeanette, it's like I was just a teenager. So it was a place where all of the kind of staring or things that really made me feel like it was a burden just melted away.
See that little kid with the curly hair? Do you see that little kid right there that we just showed you? That was Jim, age 15. He got up to some very interesting activities at camp. I won't spill the beans quite yet, though, for you, Jim. If you want to have a conversation with Jim and Judy and Nicole, you can do via YouTube right now in this very episode. Jump into YouTube, jump into the comment section, and you too can be part of our discussion. I want to go to Rashida. Rashida talks about why Camp Jened was so important at the time and really what that has done for other kids with disabilities. Have a listen, have a look.
Places like Camp Jened were important to young people with disabilities because they provided a space for them to comfortably be themselves and to connect with others like themselves, especially at a time when most camps were inaccessible. Thankfully, the disability rights movement has come a long way since, and there are more opportunities for young disabled people to grow, to learn, like AAPD summer programs. These opportunities are important because they help develop leaders that will bring about change and create a more just society.
Rashida is from the American Association of People with Disabilities. Did you feel, Judy, at the time that you were somewhere exceptional and that people were understanding? How do you relate and connect with people with disabilities that doesn't exclude them from everyday life?
I mean, I think what camp was able to do for us is, as everybody's been saying, it allowed us to recognize that we were human beings, and it gave us a space where we were able to speak about our dreams, and not only about our dreams, but we were also able to speak about our concerns about being able to achieve what we wanted to do in life because of all the barriers, because of lack of representation of disabled people in the media. And it was a space where we could plan, and we practiced how to use our voice and how to give each other optimistic feelings that in unity we would have strength. And as Jimmy was saying, it also enabled us, because television in the 1960s was bringing a new world to us. It was the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the anti-war movement. And while many of us weren't able to actively participate for various reasons, that was the model that we were looking at.
Nicole, you do something very interesting. Nicole and Jim, you do something very interesting in the film, and that is that you connect the experience of Camp Jened to a broader disability rights movement and to other movements going on in the 1970s. I'm going to play a little bit of a clip. This is from a rally, a demonstration in New York City with people with disabilities. Have a look, and then Nicole, I want you to explain why you made those connections. Let's take a look.
Disabled in Action decided to have a demonstration in New York City in front of Nixon headquarters.
We decided that we were going to sit down in the street, we were going to stop traffic. So at 4:30 in the afternoon, we formed this huge circle. We cut off 4 streets.
You get the call to action, to the barricades. You know, Judy would call it. I remember being on the ground with these big trucks coming at you. Go like, whoa.
It was a very unusual demonstration. I mean, people are not used to seeing a whole lot of folks in wheelchairs, and you had to back up. I mean, you had to back up if you were on the wrong side in front of that young woman.
This is a bigger story you're telling, Nicole. Why?
I think one of the things that was so exciting to us was to show how at Camp Jened, you know, these young people discovered their kind of common experience of oppression and believed that they could do something about it together. But across disability, there is so much diversity. And I think Judy and other leaders at the time recognized that that was kind of a superpower, you know, because it's so many different movements, so many different liberation movements were part of the disability movement. And so in Berkeley, as they started organizing and demonstrating, you know, there were gay disabled people, and there were Black disabled people, and there were Black Panthers who were disabled, and all of those people were kind of coming together and looking at disability rights. And when there was this sort of epic sit-in that we feature in the film in 77, there were members of all those groups inside the building. And so it wasn't so much, Jim and I deciding to broaden it out, but the kind of brilliant strategy that they laid out at the time, which was like, let's bring all these movements together. So I think for us, the idea of the Black Panthers, for example, deciding to bring food and supporting this, long takeover of a federal building, which resulted in some very critical disability civil rights legislation. Like, that's because they realized that, it was a better world that disabled activists were fighting for, was this, and that kind of civil rights and liberation was the same thing they were fighting for, and that everybody was in it together. And I think Jim and I felt very, very passionately about the fact that that's a really important message for today. It's a model for organizing that is really powerful.
I think it's also really important to understand that Camp Jened was a pivotal place, but the reality was there were organizations like in New York where most of the people who were part of these groups never went to Camp Jened. An organization called Disabled in Action and Pride and others that were also being driven by college campuses where disabled people were also organizing. And so I think it was many different things happening at the same time. And again, one of the reasons why the disability community was reaching out to other organizations was the model that we were seeing with the civil rights movement, with the women's movement, with the anti-war movement, where they were reaching out to other people. Now, let's be really clear. The reason the Black Panthers got involved was because one of their founding members had multiple sclerosis. So he was credible, and they joined because of him. Many other organizations, they didn't understand disability. They didn't understand a rights-based movement. Right. So there was a lot of work on the ground going on for years, working with other organizations in a way where we came and said, would you help us and we will help you. So it wasn't one way. When things were going on at the city level or the county level, we were there for each other in many different ways. And we were building a coalition that, for example, when the demonstrations occurred in 1977, there were many years of collaboration that had been going on in the Berkeley Bay Area.
I'm going to bring in this thought here. There's so many compliments about Crip Camp. So you can see here, this is the webpage, go look at this. Oscar-nominated documentary feature, lots of comments, lots of feedback. And then this comment that we got a little bit earlier, this gave me pause because I did see the intersectionality in the film when I watched it. Kay was asking for more. Have a listen, have a look.
I felt that Crip Camp could have utilized the histories and stories and direct narrative of Black people and people of color. I felt that Crip Camp really needed some more perspective on how racial justice also informed their disability rights framework. It felt very white and upper class to me, so I'm really interested in how Crip Camp could have elaborated more on other experiences as it was shaping not just Camp Jened, but later disabled policy.
Jim and Nicole, I'm going to give this to both of you. Jim, you start.
I think that one of the things that we really try to do with our film was to leverage an impact campaign in which we gave it into the hands of people who are deeply seated in the disability justice movement, which is really looking at disability rights through the lens of people who are BIPOC, LGBTQ, and that's really trying to take the visibility that we were getting and making sure that that movement could be really heard.
Nicole, go ahead.
I think that there is like a point of view that we chose to take in Crip Camp, which is that we wanted to tell the story from the perspective of this group of friends who came together at Camp Jened. And that's certainly not reflective of the entire movement. And it's certainly just kind of one story out of disability history. And so we tried really hard to give a sense of the intersectionality that was in the film, which you were talking about. And we felt it was important to really highlight that and to profile activists who had played a critical role in the particular story we were telling who had not been profiled. But I think by virtue of the fact that we chose to focus on this particular band of friends and see the story through their eyes, and that was partly because, you know, there was this coalition of people that could come together and tell the story in the film, and we could follow them throughout time, and we had this incredible archival footage of them. Because of that, it is not it's not an overview of the entire history of the movement. It's a very particular frame. And we hoped that universality of Crip Camp and the teenage experience would draw in viewers who might not otherwise have access to this history, and that the platform that Crip Camp had could hopefully lead, and in partnership with the impact campaign Jim was describing, could really lead to other stories being told. But I think that comment is very valid in the sense that there's a lot more to this story and a lot more to be explored in many other stories that should be told.
I think this is a very important question. And as everybody said, it's a totally appropriate question. I think what's really important is we're so used to not seeing documentaries on disability that Jimmy and Nicole have produced an amazing film, and it tells an amazing story. But this should not be the end of the stories that are being told. And so I think when we look in the next 5 to 10 years, we should be seeing other films, documentaries, and other, films and television programs, etc., that really continue to reflect the changes that have been going on in the movement. So, for example, the issues of race are critically important, and LGBTQ are very important. But also what's important are people with mental health disabilities and people with intellectual disabilities. At that point in time, at Camp Jened, the population of those people with disabilities were not a part of what was happening. But now, when we look at 2021, things have really exploded across racial lines, across sexual orientation, disability, and the discussions are becoming much more complex and serious and really delving deeper and deeper into what injustice is and what we need to be doing and what we need to be learning about how people are moving forward.
I want to show a couple of pictures because what you do, Jim and Nicole, you myth bust. You break down stereotypes, you explode them in an hour and 48 minutes. So there is love, there's lust, there's crabs. Have a look here on my picture, on my laptop here. There's also, which is really revealing, Jim, a hierarchy of how people with disabilities see disabilities. So do you want to share that hierarchy as we go through some of these fantastic stills from your documentary? At the top of the hierarchy, and I believe this is slightly tongue-in-cheek, were what disabilities? Because these are only things that people with disabilities would say to themselves.
Well, in the film, Denise, who we see here, kind of talks about this hierarchy of disability, and and that she felt like people with polio were at the top of the hierarchy, and folks like herself who have cerebral palsy were much lower. And I don't disagree with her having this feeling. I, as somebody with spina bifida, I didn't really think about that too much. Maybe that's because I was higher up on the hierarchy. But, I think every community has something like this, don't they? And
it's an irreverent kind of dark humour that you can share amongst yourselves, that you give us a little window inside if we are non-disabled, and also allowing people who have disabilities to recognise it as well. I gave you a very tough video comment to come off the back of Jim and Nicole. I'm going to give you a much easier one this time, and this one is from Madison. This is what she told us a little bit earlier. Have a listen, have a look.
My older brother Daniel had cerebral palsy and spent most of his life in the house, and even as a young child, I knew that there was a more fulfilling life out there for him. They could be essentially doing the same things that I do, and watching Crip Camp was very powerful and moving to me, seeing that before he was even born, there was already a sense of community out there for him. There was changes already being made, and that life could have been his. And although I'm saddened that he did not get to experience it, Crip Camp makes me so thankful that other people did get to.
Nicole, you start. Go ahead.
I mean, I think that's really beautiful, and I really love the idea of the valuing community. You know, I think that for us, we had the word community taped to the wall of our edit room, and we thought about it all the time as kind of the core of what this is about. This idea that there is community across all the diversity and difference of disabilities, and part of the power of that is that, as you know, one of the activists says in the film, if you're, in using a wheelchair, you don't know necessarily what it's like to be blind. So you're going to listen to someone, and when they tell you what their truth is, you're going to see it and believe it and trust them about their experience and fight for them the way they're fighting for you, you know. And I think that's so beautiful to recognize and value the importance of that. And we really hoped that this film would be an on-ramp, so to speak, for lots of people to be able to find community in disability community, and also to be able to feel proud and see the value in identifying as disabled, which sometimes I think people are afraid that there might be a cost to identifying as disabled. But the more the movement grows and the more people see the real value in that community, I think the more people can find their way to it and benefit from it.
If I may, Judy, I want to just tap into your expertise as disability rights activist and expert. This is Bengal Dragon, who brings us way up to date right now. The recent statistics for people with disabilities is a very sad reflection of the failure of overall for equality for disabled people movement. Immediate restructuring is required. Basically, where are we now, Judy?
So if we're talking about the world, we're talking about a more organized group of disabled people basically in every country. When you think back 30, 40, 50 years, the international movement was really just emerging. In the United States, we've seen 50 years of work of organizing and many laws being passed that really mirror other laws like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and other pieces of legislation. Where we are today is with an international movement that looks at something called the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, where more than 175 countries have ratified, meaning 175 governments have agreed that they will develop laws, implement laws that will enable disabled people to go to school, get jobs, make transportation accessible, housing, employment opportunities, etc. But we're also in a serious situation where disability is still a very marginalized community. Sure. I mean, we're talking about wonderful things that have been happening, but the reality of the situation is disabled people are probably one of the most marginalized groups. And then add other aspects, disability, race, poverty, gender, etc., that makes life more and more difficult. So I think where we need to be is much more unification, not just within the disability community, but within the rights and justice movements around the world, to understand that if a non-disabled woman is raped, she likely has a disability, that the women's movement needs to be looking at issues of violence against women with disabilities and women who acquire disabilities, as an example. That's the same thing in the environment, etc.
Thank you. I have to show you a few more pictures. This is Judy as a little one, right? This is her as a little bigger one, as an activist. And this is her right here. She's still being an activist right here on the stream. Let me just embarrass Jim, because that's equal opportunities here. This is Jim as a youngster back here. This is the Crip Camp website. And then right here is Crip Camp, the virtual website. And then right here, currently streaming on Netflix, Crip Camp, A Disability Revolution. Judy, Jim, Nicole, I could speak to you for a couple of hours, but I only have a couple of seconds left to say thank you so much for being on the stream. Really appreciate you. And I will see you next time. Femi, okay? Signing off. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.